Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to TEDxHopeCollege 2024. My name is Lauren Toko. I am this year's director, and I am so honored to be able to represent our executive team and volunteers on stage in our 4th year as a student organization. TEDxHopeCollege is an independently organized TED-like event created by students for students to share their ideas and experiences. Every year we choose a theme, and this year's theme is the endless journey. The idea is that there are things, experiences, people, and, well, ideas that we never stop pursuing even in our impermanent time here on Earth. So each speaker will take on this broad concept and make it their own. I am so pleased to introduce to you our 9 amazing speakers tonight. We will begin the event with our first 5 speakers, then break for a short 15-minute intermission, then end with our last 4. We ask that you please take this time now to silence your cell phones and personal devices. And without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker tonight, a senior from Midland, Michigan, studying chemistry. Her talk is titled, Transforming the Culture Around Conversation at College. Please join me in welcoming Therese Joffrey.
I want you to imagine a world where your doctors didn't wash their hands. Wouldn't that be ridiculous? But that was the reality for so many doctors in the 1840s, including Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis. Semmelweis noticed a severe mortality difference between mothers and doctor-run clinics versus midwife-run clinics. You see, doctors would perform autopsies in the morning where they dealt with pathogens and germs, and then, without washing their hands, they would go and work with patients. Midwives, however, did not perform these autopsies, and thus were not contaminating their patients like the doctors were. Common sense, right? So, Semmelweis implemented a hand-washing procedure that led to an 82% decrease in mortality rates at one of his clinics. He continued to gather more data on hand-washing and mortality rates, and then brought his findings to the medical community. But here's the catch. Most doctors didn't want to listen, and his voice was not welcomed. Many of these physicians were offended at the accusation that it was their fault that these women had died. This community didn't listen to Semmelweis, and it took more than 20 years for hand-washing to become a normalized practice within medicine. Long story short, a lack of tolerance for Semmelweis' ideas led to so many people suffering. But I'm not here today to tell you about the evolution of hand-washing within medicine. Instead, I'm here to tell you that a lack of tolerance for differing viewpoints within higher education produces real, tangible harm. This is our disheartening reality. I watch as college campuses are unable to foster coexisting but conflicting viewpoints. And after 4 years at college, I remain unconvinced that universities actually uphold environments full of robust debate and inquiry. Just a few months ago, I organized an event where I brought two different viewpoints together for a conversation. However, because our moderator had a history with views deemed extreme, the event almost didn't happen. I had a front row seat to professors and other campus organizations not willing to engage in my event because our moderator held controversial ideas. This intolerance is why we have to change. I believe that college should be a place where students come to discuss difficult topics no matter one's background. So that's why we should implement something called academic pluralism. The Heterodox Academy defines academic pluralism as three things: free inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement within higher education. It's the cultivation of a neutral forum for robust political and social debate. However, pluralism isn't just this idea of free speech. It also promotes the coexistence of extreme or even offensive ideas. But for this type of dialogue to exist, it is equally important that we approach conversations with radical openness and the capacity to change our minds. We have to enter dialogue by letting go of our egos and be willing to be wrong. I entered a conversation with a peer about abortion, a very emotional and personal topic. Even though we had the capacity to be harmed or even offended by each other's ideas, we came into those conversations with open minds. Instead of arguing, we put ourselves in each other's shoes and tried to understand each other's viewpoints. We didn't yell or get upset, but calmly shared our own experiences and ideas about the issue. Now, frankly, this type of dialogue is uncomfortable, and we will be offended, but that shouldn't stop the conversation, because it just may lead to two very important things: to prevent harm and to promote innovation and change within our society. A culture where it's normal to question all notions and engage in productive debate allows for people to grow in their own opinions. After this careful investigation and discussion, ideas can then be deemed harmful or helpful because every viewpoint is taken into account and understood. We have the opportunity now to have these conversations, and we have the responsibility to do so because it just may prevent something harmful in our future. Free inquiry and diverse viewpoints also promotes progress, as it allows for a true exchange of ideas. How did smartphones or rockets ever get developed? How did women gain the right to vote? It was because people challenged the status quo and others listened. Through both radical inquiry as well as an openness for conversation, innovation can be inspired. Now, all of this doesn't seem like a new idea. Higher education has promoted dialogue effectively for decades. But recently I've watched as these three principles of free inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement degrade. A nonprofit, nonpartisan group called the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression has conducted a survey each of the past 4 years where they have asked students whether they can have conversation on their campuses. In 2023's survey, 20% of over 55,000 student respondents said that they fairly often or very often could not express their own opinion on a subject because of how those around them may respond. This is similar to 2022's survey of 22% and 2021's of 21%. From these data, it seems that students have noticed this degrading dialogue on their campuses. And recently I've seen as colleges are unable to foster conversation relating to things like the Middle East. As a result, conversations have been poorly taken and have been poorly constructed by their students, faculty, and their administrators. That's why they have to change and understand how they can promote their own opinions without degrading others' ideas. So, how do we as students in colleges promote these three qualities of free inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement? Many professors all over the country have come together and produced the Chicago and Princeton Principles. And the Heterodox Academy and the Academic Freedom Alliance have shared their approaches. I'm now going to tell you my 4 takeaways from these sources that will help to promote better dialogue within higher education. Number 1, universities should be a neutral forum for a robust political and social debate. Colleges should not take partisan stances on any political or social issue unless it directly impacts that school's ability to function. If colleges release statements that take a particular side, this will only perpetuate the growing division between its community members. This neutrality has to be consistent and favor no side. And colleges just need to let go of control over the conversation and allow for debate to commence. Number 2, university professors have an obligation to their students to present controversial material within their classrooms. This can be done by telling them different ideas relating to the subject that they're teaching, even if it may be offensive. However, professors do not have the ability to promote their own political or social ideas because this will allow for students to engage and understand topics without fear or retribution from their professors. I also want to note that it's vital for professors to help promote inquiry within higher education. They're the ones that interact with students on a day-to-day basis. And they're the ones that can help transform our culture of closed-mindedness to one of openness and conversation. Number 3, universities should help grow free expression and dialogue outside of the classrooms. This can be done by inviting intellectually diverse speakers, hosting events, and staying consistent in all university communications. Most of the time, students aren't in the classroom. And that's why it's imperative that they can learn and challenge diverse ideas outside of the classroom. However, with any type of expression, there are limits. Campus members do not have the right to use their speech to intimidate or violate any state, federal, or university policies and laws. Instead, through the appreciation of diverse viewpoints and constructive dialogue, opposing ideas can be promoted effectively in a respectful manner. And finally, number 4, we as students have to demand better. Most of this work is up to us. We have to help transform our culture into one where members are radically open-minded. We have to help renormalize differences. This will allow us to approach conversations with a willingness to process, learn, and debate ideas. By considering all viewpoints, compromises can be made to progress our society further. Policies only restrict dialogue. So that's why it's important that we work together to promote this culture change revolving around dialogue so that we can live in an intellectually free environment. We have to let go of control over what can be expressed and instead engage with all ideas, no matter how controversial. The problems facing our world are not black and white. We are complex people with complex problems. So only a world full of diverse perspectives and constructive disagreement, encompassing all aspects of an issue, can we actually innovate and solve problems. It's up to higher education to promote this culture of dialogue. Because if it doesn't exist here, what hope do we have for the rest of the world? Thank you.
Thank you, Therese. Our next speaker is a sophomore from Wyoming, Michigan, studying philosophy and psychology. His talk is titled Beyond Si Se Puede, The Limits of Latinidad and Embracing Indigenous Roots. Please join me in welcoming Marco Lopez Vargas.
Let us begin by respectfully acknowledging that we meet for this talk on the traditional land of the Odawa, Potawatomi, and other Anishinaabe people who were forced to relocate when a contingent of Dutch settlers moved into this area in 1847. We recognize the continuing presence of Anishinaabe on this land and their unique and enduring relationship with their traditional territories. We recognize, too, that those of us from Western cultures have not treated the land well. We have an obligation to clean up the pollution and reduce the suburban sprawl that has poisoned and damaged the land, air, and water in so many ways. Here's a quote to keep in mind from journalist Levi Reichert. That is, knowing our history helps us know our place in this world. I'll say that again. Knowing our history helps us know our place in this world. I was present at an Indigenous Peoples lecture here at Hope College with Levi discussing the impact of boarding schools on Native peoples in the US. Listening to survivor stories, there was a common theme that tied them together. They had all lost their cultural ties. Like some of the stories I heard, I realized I too had internalized those external narratives and hierarchies that underscored my sense of identity. Prior to attending this lecture, I had been on the path of relearning my history so that I could find belonging in my community. Born and raised in West Michigan in the early 2000s as a child of Mexican immigrants, I grew up experiencing the uniqueness of our food, music, and even the popular pet name, Firulais, which finds its origins in the English phrase, free of lice. Who would have known that the name stems from US authorities enforcing the Bracero program? This program, which in the 1950s required Mexican farm workers that migrated to the US to be flea-free. In elementary school, I began to gain a deeper understanding of how different my immediate household environment was from my peers, the majority of which were white. At this point, I had no knowledge about the deeper history behind something like the name Firulais, and to me, it was a common pet name and nothing more. I didn't even understand the grammar or history behind the Spanish my parents had taught me, and I had to dedicate time to learning it by reading magazines like El Vocero and El Informador, which are common in Mexican supermarkets around Grand Rapids. Being in West Michigan, I was separated from the intricacies of the localized culture my parents grew up in due to it not being present in the same capacity. While Grand Rapids is substantially diverse compared to other parts of West Michigan, I am still a minority. And subsequently, I was treated like one growing up, and I faced your typical discrimination from your unfriendly neighborhood racist. What surprised me most, however, was the discrimination that was prevalent within our own social group, comprised of Mexicans who had stronger ties to their homeland. The discrimination was often multifaceted. However, for many of us, the reality was that we had internalized colorist beliefs, including me. The conflict of my identity as a Mexican threatened my acceptance of our culture. So I went up to my mom and dad, and I told them, I'm a white American, and I hate Mexico. Nevertheless, I couldn't refute the obvious truth that was my skin, with all its brown glory. In my attempts to assimilate, none of them were successful. I couldn't embrace my identity as a Mexican because the culture just wasn't as pervasive as US pop culture. And I couldn't embrace my identity as a US citizen because others just refused to see me that way, even though I literally have the right documentation. From there on, I simply drifted around confused until I was made aware that there were other people that weren't Mexicans, but like me, Latinos, a super broad, pan-ethnic term that seemed to unify many different people, including Mexicans. This little revelation gave me a sense of belonging, and it held me over until I reached my high school graduation in 2022. I accepted that I was Latino until my dad revealed that I had indigenous Purepecha ancestry through my grandfather, but I hadn't understood how defining this trait was at the time. It was only here at Hope College in a class titled Spanish for Heritage Speakers. I found myself deeply intrigued by the history of Latinidad, the concept of being Latino. My professor said one statement that cascaded through my head, leading to a rebirth of my search for truth and belonging. Latinidad dates back to ancient Roman times, not referring to people from South and Central America, but instead to descendants from an area around the city of Rome, Latium. We then dove into the revival of Latinidad in the 19th century as a means to categorize groups that declared independence from Spanish rule. Following mass declarations of independence from Spanish powers, US intervention in Latin America was on the rise, and many economies were destabilized. Among those was Mexico's, my country of descendants. A major intervention was the Mexican-American War. The US sequestered and annexed much of Mexico's land that used to reach up into Texas and Northern California. Reeling from the loss of many valuable resources and the heavy disruption of social and cultural life, many people immigrated to the US in search of better economic opportunities. And Mexico is not unique in this. The US interrupted many countries, like Nicaragua, for example, when they sought to build a pro-slavery state. And while the US's efforts remained largely unsuccessful, it's estimated that tens of thousands of Nicaraguans were displaced as a result. Latinidad has unified many people that had been disrupted, like us, like the Nicaraguans, like the people from South and Central America, and it has led to many positive changes. In the US, it has provided a shared identity and aided diverse groups in gaining political power and agency. Like when we all sought civil justice in the 1960s Chicano movement, and we exclaimed, "Sí se puede, yes we can," from streets declaring that others will no longer dictate our future. However, we have reached a critical moment where we must now ask ourselves, ¿qué se puede? What can we do? What can we do as a community to better represent ourselves? In the exploration of my identity, I realized that my history was so much more than just Latino. Latinidad explains what happened when unique BIPOC folk were destabilized, hence my ancestry. So, I had to take a deeper dive, and what I found was disappointing. While there is evidence of this rich culture with beautiful traditions, there is a distinct lack of text and media to grasp the culture that I descend from. And us Purépechas aren't unique in this. The stories at Levi's lecture resonated with the history of my people. Both of us lost much of our cultures, and many of us are starting to find our way back, including me. If we don't take back our identities now, we risk losing them forever. I am not advocating that we cancel or remove Latinidad altogether, but that we engage in critical conversations, highlighting its limitations, while appreciating the shared history and cultures it has bridged. As a pan-ethnic community that risks erasing the influences of many underrepresented communities, it is our responsibility to focus on amplifying unique BIPOC voices in social media, political representation, and even among our local organizations in the greater Holland community. This means participating in local efforts to clean up the sacred land, attending events that emphasize underrepresented experiences, local especially, and supporting legislation that bolsters the rights of BIPOC people. This dialogue on Latinidad serves as a lesson to all that accurate representation matters, especially within our relative communities. I am standing here today, proud to say that I have found my current belonging at Hope. My name is Marco Lopez Vargas, Latino by consequence and Indigenous Purépecha. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Marco. Our next speaker is a junior from Wyoming, Michigan, studying elementary education. His talk is titled Smokeless Screens, Crafting a Life Beyond Digital Inhalation. Please welcome Jack Concannon.
Let's do some math. Oh, shoot, hold on, sorry. Yeah, Be Real went off. Anyway, where were we? Math, right. Yes. There are 8,760 hours in a year. Sounds like a lot. If we take away the average American sleeps 7 hours a night, 365 days a year, that puts us at 2,555 hours of sleep. If we take that from our total time, that brings us down to 6,205 total waking hours. Next, the dreaded job. The average American works 8 hours a day, 260 days a year, which brings us to a total of 2,080 hours. If we take that from our remaining awake time, we are left with 4,125 hours, which sounds like a lot. Dang it. Sorry, my mom texted me. Where was I? Yes, 4,125 remaining hours. In 2020, the average American spent 1,300 hours on social media. Let me say that again. The average American spent 1,300 hours. That is nearly 32% of your remaining leisure time in a day. What can we possibly gain from 1,300 hours of social media? For comparison, it takes roughly 800 hours of in-class time to earn an associate's degree in nursing. Now, I'm not saying that everyone should become a nurse. I know a lot of people that faint at the sight of the blood. But what I am saying is that we should be more conscious of our time. Humans are slow to change. Speaking of slow to change, the cigarette was first introduced in France in 1843. A new machine that automated the rolling of them allowed the mass sale and production. 111 years later, the first credible research performed by Dr. Horn and Dr. Hammond of the American Cancer Society stated that a man who regularly smokes is more likely to have premature death than one who never smoked. With this as scientific fact, 70 years later, in 2024, an average of 480,000 people in America alone still die from smoking-related causes. That's the equivalent of the entire city of Miami being wiped off every single year in America alone. Humans are stubborn and slow to change. We're slow to change our thinking because that's the way it's always been, when truthfully, the only thing that's always been is change. We accept that cigarettes are dangerous, as evidenced by the 1983 movie The Outsiders, when Dallas says, "Got a cancer stick, Johnny?" Similarly, I believe social media is harmful to our society. I believe it's become an addiction to the point where people are incapable of walking or driving or talking to one another without the influence of technology. I believe that it is commonplace to message someone in the exact same room as you. I believe it's commonplace that any inkling of boredom creeping up, you default to scrolling mindlessly through your phone to fill a void. Why? Why are we humans so slow to change? Continuing the trend, asbestos was first introduced commercially in 1866. The first report claiming that asbestos caused death was in 1906. It took 83 more years until asbestos products were finally banned in the United States by the EPA. Similarly, in 4th century BC, the first use of lead in paint was introduced. As early as 1786, Benjamin Franklin wrote about the dangers and harmful effects of lead in paint. It took until 1978 for paint companies to be required to remove lead from their paint. Why? Why are we so slow to change? Now, people don't see social media in the same way. They see it as useful. I am not the poster child for an anti-social media campaign, but I have lived some of my best moments disconnected from social media and from my phone. And I want to encourage everyone to use social media as simply a tool, not a crutch. We're brushing off the negative effects of social media because people aren't dying from lung cancer or from asbestos poisoning or from lead poisoning. But there is proof that social media can lead to increased suicide rates. So yes, people are dying and we're doing nothing to stop it. Now let's look at this normal schedule. 8 a.m., wake up to an alarm on your phone. 8:15, brush your teeth while listening to your favorite podcast. 8:30, listen to that same podcast while eating breakfast. On your way to work, you're listening to another podcast. You get to work, you work for a couple hours. 10 a.m. rolls around, you get stressed by customers, so you decide to go and take a break where you scroll mindlessly through social media. You head back to work 15 minutes later. Noon rolls around, it's time for lunch, and what goes better with your bologna sandwich than watching your favorite YouTuber's new video? You head back to work, again you get stressed by customers at 1 p.m., and you default to scrolling mindlessly while taking a break. You work the rest of your shift and head home while using your phone as a map because there's construction and you only know one way to get home. Once you get home, you sit down on the couch and you scroll through your phone and you check on social media. You check on your favorite celebrities. You check and see what your friends and families are doing. And before you know it, it's 8 p.m. You're hungry, so you order through your phone, through DoorDash, to bring food to you. 8:45 rolls around and you decide to hang out with your friends via a virtual FaceTime. 10 a.m. and it's time to go to bed. You scroll through social media to see if anything else has changed while you're on the phone call, and you set your alarm for the next day, plug it in, and set your phone on the nightstand just to do it again the next day. Now, what does it have to do with anything? Think about it like this. 8 a.m., you wake up. What's the best thing to start the morning off with is a fresh cigarette. 8:30, you eat breakfast, you smoke a cigarette. You head to work, why not smoke one on the way? You get to work, you get stressed by customers at 9, and so what you do is you take a smoke break out back. What goes better with your bologna sandwich than a quick smoke break? You head back into work. You go and you take another smoke break because you get stressed by customers at 1. On your way home from work, you get another cigarette and smoke another cigarette. Once you get home, you smoke a cigarette waiting before your food arrives. Then you smoke another cigarette while it comes to you. Once your friends come over, you smoke another cigarette. And when you're finally done for the day, you lay in your bed and you take your final puff and put it in the ashtray just to start over again. In this standard day schedule, every single time that you decide, I need a void in my life filled with something, instead of defaulting to social media, you can look at it as if you're defaulting to a cigarette. I have worked the past 2 summers as a camp counselor in a completely and utterly technology-free zone. At the beginning of each week, new campers come and there are no technology involved. As well as the staff, we all take our phones, we put them in a box that is locked away in the office until the end of the week. It's a weird adjustment to get used to, especially in the day and age we live in. But once you finally get used to it, the difference is immeasurable. The first thing you notice is that your sleep schedule becomes more regular, and you feel more rested each day when you wake up. Without the constant bombardment of stimulus from every single news outlet and social media post you could ever imagine, you are able to relax. The next thing you notice is that you're able to have real conversations with other people without the influence of technology. You are able to give your full attention to something, unlike when you have your phone sitting in your pocket. It's crazy, the results. By the end of the week, you're able to get your phone out of a box. And a lot of the times, don't even remember to do so. Now, I want that change for everyone. So what can you do to help yourself in your future? Our future. We're all in on this together. If this were as simple as asbestos, I would recommend, after the first person died, not to buy products with asbestos. Or after the first person died from lead poisoning, I would recommend not buying paint with lead in it. If the first person died from lung cancer caused by cigarette usage, I would recommend not smoking. Now, we don't live in a world where it's realistic to set down your phone and be able to still stay connected. So the first thing I'll recommend is turn off non-essential notifications. You do not need to know every single time your favorite celebrity posts what he or she is eating for dinner. The next thing that you can do is put timers on all of your apps and stick to them, because it is very, very easy to set the timer, make your own passcode, and then once you run out of time, just change how much time you get. Stick to it. Delete social media altogether. I understand it's beneficial. I understand it's important to connect with family and friends, but those who are really close to you are going to be able to still get a hold of you somehow. The last thing I'll say is put your phone in black and white. It reduces the amount of stimulus coming off your phone, and you will be less drawn to it. You'll be less stimulated by your phone, and you'll start to use it less. Now, as we travel together through time, more social media platforms will come out, new technologies will arrive, and you will be convinced to join. It's how you interact with it that will affect all of our futures. I'll end by asking this. Are we going to accept the inevitable change or simply pass the cancer stick? Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Our next speaker is a senior from Louisville, Kentucky, studying studio art and sociology. Their talk is titled, "A Piece of Our Illusion of Progress." Please join me in welcoming Joe Locke.
The painting you see here, completed in 1948, is titled Number 5 by Jackson Pollock. In 2006, this painting sold for $140 million. This may come as a shock to many of you. I mean, it's honestly fair. A similar work has probably been made in a kindergarten class by rolling around a paint-covered golf ball. Please don't think I'm bashing Pollock, though. He fundamentally changed fine art as the father of abstract expressionism. You simply can't take a modern or contemporary art course without learning about his work. The demand for his work is significant today, as nearly every modern art museum and well-regarded private collector is expected to have a Pollock. Pollock was well known for the way that he created art, often painting on the ground, using unstretched canvas and house paint. I've spent hours observing Pollock's work, watching the lines as they intertwine and create a complex narrative of shapes. Clement Greenberg, a renowned critic of Pollock's work, believed the art was paint about paint. Greenberg believed Pollock was drawing on specific elements of art as the content, rather than depicting visual space within our world. This work and its following movements of minimalism and reduction painting became artwork that was only really relevant to those within the sector of visual arts. No longer was it necessary for painting to reflect an environment relative to anyone's knowledge. I believe there's some element of truth in Greenberg's description of why Pollock's work was so art historically impactful. However, I want to challenge the work as coming from a place of personal need to sustain oneself, in addition to this widely considered creative genius. In the last 30 years, the top 1% of Americans have gained over $21 trillion, while the lower 50% have actually lost money, equivalent to approximately $900 billion. As inflation and price gouging continue to rise, the value of money is decreasing. Meanwhile, workers are being compensated at the same rate. The working class is being forced to produce exponentially more out of the necessity to simply survive. Unfortunately, something we can't produce more of is time. There comes a point where time, along with human needs, restricts the amount of work that can be produced. No longer is one work week enough to sustain the worker. Therefore, the process of production has been forcibly changed, maximizing time by reducing the quality of the work. I call this shift a modularization of work. A modularization of work is the act of producing more in less time. Assembly line production was popularized in Detroit in 1913. Henry Ford designed this system as a way to reduce the amount of time it took to manufacture early automobiles. This decreased the production cost of cars, enabling more affordable prices. And this opened up access to the middle class to purchase cars and drove up profits for Ford. Although the assembly line production system was beneficial for Ford, in return, it created a less innovative workforce. Employees were taught to complete one small part of a larger product. If there was a discrepancy within a previous step, it's likely the next employee within the chain wouldn't catch this issue prior to completion, leading to a lower quality product. The assembly line system has since been widely popularized and continues to have an impact on our society today. Now, Jackson Pollock modularized his work. Instead of using fine artist pigments, he used house paint. Instead of using handmade brushes, he used sticks and stiffened brushes, in addition to just pouring the paint right out of the can. Instead of stretching a canvas and priming the surface, a process that consists of multiple rounds of priming and sanding the stretched fabric, Pollock used raw, unstretched canvas. Simply laid it on the ground. Pollock likely worked on more than one piece at a time in order to continue working while others tried. In addition to making artwork that is extremely hard to preserve, Pollock popularized a process that permitted faster production. Whether or not this was intentional is irrelevant because it was necessary. Pollock was not independently wealthy. In fact, he likely fell within the starving artist stereotype and modularized his work in order to realistically produce at the speed necessary to sustain himself. Given that art is often seen as a reflection of culture, the change in process present in Pollock's work demonstrates an important shift of modularization leaking from the physical production line into the ideology of the broader culture. Art must be popularized and socially accepted to be considered relevant, especially a relevance equivalent to tens of millions of dollars today. The acceptance of artwork like Pollock's demonstrates an important cultural shift caused by modularization, a shift towards a cultural acceptance of reduction. A large portion of you are college students. Think about your education. If a professor gives you the option to read 50 pages or watch a video on those 50 pages, you're going to pick the video, in part because it will hold our ever-decreasing attention spans, but also because it's the easier thing to do. As with any translation, the video cannot effectively communicate all aspects of the original text. Yet our culture tells us that a subpar translation is better than a likely alternative of an absence of any comprehension. By watching the video, you are modularizing your work. Meanwhile, our cultural acceptance of reduction is affirming your lack of comprehension. I'm currently working on a series of work surrounding the idea of an illusion of progress. This term was introduced to me at the Gwangju Biennial in South Korea after viewing the installation titled Terminal Destiny by artist Jawan Yu. According to the biennial's description, this work is a continuation of his research into contemporary conditions that propel relentless modes of production. You see such an illusion of progress achieved at the expense of environmental destruction. I became obsessed with this term, illusion of progress. It just stuck with me. I started questioning everything around me related to our progressing society. I listened to my friends as they talked about their family history, or watched and analyzed peers and mentors' relationship to work. I resonated with a feeling of dependence on my phone and other technology, as well as a lack of basic functional understanding of the things I use in my everyday life. I wanted to figure out what progress really even means, and how do we measure it? As Americans, we live in a society that directly correlates progress with production. This falls nicely in line with Jawan Yu's description of contemporary conditions contemporary conditions that propel relentless modes of production, curating this illusion of progress. But I wasn't satisfied with this description. Living in Italy earlier last year, I became accustomed to a slower way of living. During class times, there was an emphasis on taking breaks and having a separation of life and work. Going out to dinner wasn't a 30-minute meal rushed out by the waiter, but instead 3-hour-long dinners that turned to social time. This led me to thinking progress must be something more than production. Progress is a version of change that promotes something better. So, isn't aging progress? What about preventing your child from experiencing the same hardships you did? We tend to forget about these other forms of progress as our cultural acceptance of reduction narrows our field of vision. Measuring these marginalized forms of progress on a societal scale is tricky, I dare say nearly impossible, and we have been tunnel visioned into productional progress. I believe that our cultural acceptance of reduction, brought about by mass modularization, is a big piece of our illusion of progress. So how far will we allow this cultural acceptance of reduction to go? With the accessible introduction of devices like ChatGPT and other chatbots, we now have the potential to modularize our own thoughts. We live in a society where our devices have been designed to trigger addictive instincts in our brains. Every day, significant amounts of time, which we previously defined as being so valuable, is being poured into apps designed to feed our want to consume. While media apps continue to be fed by our addictions, we are turning to devices like ChatGPT to modularize our creativity and thinking, characteristics that define us as uniquely human. We sit now on the brink of another type of industrial revolution. This time, instead of modularizing production, we are modularizing our own thoughts. Modularization of production wasn't a completely negative thing, though, right? I mean, the working class got cars, and assembly line production opened access to a better standard of living for a growing American population. Similarly, there are applications of AI that are doing great things. An AI platform developed in 2015 analyzes employee performance reviews in addition to personal identification factors like race and gender in order to assess if a company is providing equal pay to its employees. With the exception of the individual who wrote the performance review, this platform is removing human bias from the picture and creating a more equitable work environment. Similarly, there are numerous positive implications of AI in healthcare. This technology will and should be developed. However, as a society, we need to question if our cultural acceptance of reduction is eating away at aspects of our humanity. So what can we do about this? I certainly don't have all the answers, but I think that we can start with curiosity. Let's take time to question the insane world that we live in. There are deep complexities and history all around us. Instead of scrolling, engage in your environment and activate your creativity and awareness. Go for a walk and actually pay attention to the things you see around you. Maybe you'll suddenly realize how interesting the form of exterior air conditioning units are. Or become obsessed with a certain style of handrails that seems to litter your neighborhood. These observations could push you towards new developments and inspire new thinking. Let's fight the addictive urge to constantly reduce ourselves. The moments of transition when we are alone at a party or waiting for our name to be called at the doctor's office, instead of pulling out your phone to further modularize your work, engage with the environment around you. I think we'll all be surprised at the things we miss on a daily basis. Technology has always been meant to improve our lives, yet over and over again, it proves to blur the line between our personal and work lives. We are being expected to use technology to further modularize our lives as it pushes productivity. Devices like the Humane AI Pen and Apple's new Vision Pro will only push this further. Instead of prioritizing productivity, let's prioritize other forms of progress in our lives. Let's find validation in taking long dinners and progressing our communities. Do research on those handrails that piqued your curiosity and progress your own knowledge. We talked about what Greenberg thought of Pollock's work. Paint about paint, right? But while Pollock was alive, he outright said that his art had no objective meaning. For him, it was about the content came from the ritual of making his work, an expression of curiosity, and movement fills each of his strokes. This certainly won't fix all of our problems, but what if we start by finding something to be ritualistic about? Something that, like Pollock's paintings, we can do over and over again, performed through a new creative lens. And with that, we may be able to stop reducing ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Our last speaker before intermission is a junior from Livonia, Michigan, studying biology and business. Her talk is titled Exploration and Education, A Journey, Not a Path. Please welcome Madeline Kinney.
You're studying what? Oh, what an interesting combination. That's so random. Never heard that one before. What are you going to do with that? These are all common phrases I have heard when I've told people my areas of study. Majors in biology and business with minors in classical studies and religion. But why is this the case? Why is this random? Why is this rare? From the moment we graduate high school, our identity shifts from our college of choice to our area of study. High schoolers are constantly bombarded with questions about their future. Society seemingly demands this mindset. Like many other students, I experienced this firsthand. However, at the time, I felt like I was alone. As soon as college acceptance letters spread throughout my senior year, my friends and my peers seemed to already have their lives and careers all planned out. This continued during my first year of college, most especially felt during orientation weekend. As my peers would proudly declare their areas of study, from accounting to pre-med to teaching, I was in awe, and I deeply desired this same shining answer. However, when my introduction came around, the word undecided seemed to hang in the air. It was as if undecided was synonymous with incompetent, unsuccessful, and lagging. I had barely even started college, and I already felt behind. The summer before starting my first year of college, I remember having an interaction with a peer that stuck with me during my first year and still does to this day. As my peer and I discussed our soon-to-be college lives and adventures, she mentioned to me that she really wanted to study in the STEM field. However, she was accepted into her college's business program. As she discussed this further, she said to me, "So, I guess I'll go into business?" Long after our conversation, her words continued to reverberate in my mind. I became fixated on the verb she used, guess. Far too often, society stigmatizes the idea of being amid the unknown. If we don't know something, or if we don't have something all figured out, there must be something wrong with us, we must be inept, or we must be lagging. Or we must be lagging. This mindset threatens colleges and universities throughout the nation. According to the online etymology dictionary, one of the etymologies of the verb to educate comes from the Latin word educare, which means to bring up, rear, and to educate, which can be further understood through the Latin word educere, which means to bring out and lead forth. As such, I believe the foundation of an educational system should promote its very roots. To me, these roots reflect the idea that colleges should nurture the care of self-discovery, exploration, and enlightenment, enabling holistic learning and more well-rounded, informed individuals that can then truly go out and lead forth. However, far too often, students are made to feel as if this is unnatural. Students must seemingly have insight before experience. To me, I see these two different approaches as manifestations of two different mindsets: path culture and journey culture. To understand them, Let's look at the word associations. When looking at the term path, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary proposes a couple synonyms. Some of these include track, route, line, and descent. Conversely, when looking at the term journey, some of the synonyms include expedition, pilgrimage, odyssey, and progress. Interestingly, too, is that when looking at the term journey, the dictionary also references the term journeyer, suggesting an individual involved, an active agent and force. To me, these word associations reveal that path culture is much more narrow-minded, linear, and transactional, while journey culture encompasses holistic learning, curiosity, and exploration. To put it simply, journey culture enables growth rather than guess. But why is this so important? When looking at high school students, a survey conducted by Best Colleges found that 52% of their surveyed respondents said that they felt pressure to make decisions about their future too soon. In a 2022 survey conducted by Gallup and the Lumina Foundation, researchers found that 55% of their surveyed post-secondary students said that emotional stress was their top reason for considering withdrawing in the past 6 months. Interestingly, too, is looking at post-college graduates. In a survey conducted by the Harris Poll on behalf of CNBC Make It, researchers found that 47% of their surveyed adults aged 33 to 40 said that they wish they had chosen a different career from when they had started out. But what if? What if these issues could be mitigated simply through a shift in perspective? What if adopting journey culture could lower these stressors and instead increase confident, informed decision-making for students? And what if then students more often chose careers aligned with their passions and their talents? How different would the world look? Perhaps then the world would be filled with greater positive impact and solutions. So what are ways colleges and universities can cultivate journey culture? The first and foundational step is raising awareness. Students need to know that they are not alone. In fact, according to the US Department of Education, 30% of undergraduate students change their major at least once during their first 3 years of their undergraduate experience. Some tangible ways for colleges and universities to raise awareness could include offering academic sessions and workshops centered on this issue, having support and mentorship programs for students, bringing in a speaker series and panels on this issue, and having robust resource centers. As a result, students will become equipped with the tools and community to see college through the lens of a pilgrimager. How different then would the world look? Ultimately, as institutions of education, colleges have a responsibility to both educare and educare, cultivating an atmosphere of formation and fulfillment. Only then can students authentically uncover their true potential, achieve new feats, and embrace their spectacular, endless journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Now we will take a short 15-minute break. Please feel free to enjoy concessions in the lobby, and we'll see you back here for our last 4 speakers. Our speaker to begin the second half of the event is a freshman from Holland, Michigan, studying psychology and philosophy. This talk has brief mention of suicidal ideation. If you're sensitive to this, please feel free to step out now. Her talk is titled, How My Teacher Saved My Life. Please welcome Cameron Dumas.
Perfectionism dwells in every fiber of my being. There's just something so pure about getting everything correct. It compels me. From a young age, my self-worth began to rest in the approval and praise of a job perfectly done. However, I grew highly self-critical, and I developed a fear of failure. I saw mistakes as devastating setbacks. The first person to help me recognize the harm in my unhealthy perfectionism was my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Andrews. Mr. Andrews actually believed in the beauty of mistakes. He taught my 5th grade class that mistakes were inevitable and important. To demonstrate this, he would tally his own mistakes on the front whiteboard throughout the year. Mr. Andrews had done this for each of his classes, and he still continues to do so. Here's his mistakes board from this school year. As you can see, he's already at 76. I remember my classmates shouting, "That's a mistake," when Mr. Andrews multiplied 6 times 8 as 42. He would laugh at himself and then willingly slash another mark besides the tens of other times he had messed up that year. By embracing his mistakes in front of my class, Mr. Andrews showed me how to be forgiving of myself and my learning. Because my 5th grade teacher normalized mistakes, I worked to grow out of my unhealthy perfectionism. Now, I'm able to put myself in environments that glorify flawlessness without tearing down my self-worth. I play tennis, the sport that's literally called the game of errors. I study vocal performance, the craft with the mantra, practice makes perfect. I have goals to pursue law, the career path that requires precision. Despite still facing my own perfectionism, I can handle the pressure and thrive. I give a lot of thanks to Mr. Andrews for nurturing my 5th grade self away from the fear of failure. Here's a picture of us together before my high school graduation. Aren't we cute? I've grown into the person I am today because of the seed he planted years ago. We spend the most formative years of our lives with our educators. Because of that, they have the power to become some of our greatest mentors. The time I've spent in the classroom has led me to understand that education isn't solely about academic achievement. It involves equipping students with the knowledge, values, and confidence to lead meaningful lives. I once heard a beautiful analogy for the impact of an educator. I actually heard it from Mr. Walma, a close family friend who recently retired from the classroom. He said the relationship between an educator and a student is like growing bamboo. And I'll explain what he means. When bamboo is first planted, it requires 4 years of careful nurturing, watering, and sunlight. During this time period, the bamboo root system establishes underground. However, no growth is visible above ground. In the 5th year, the bamboo finally shoots upward. It takes only 60 days for the plant to grow nearly 80 feet tall. In fact, the plant can grow 6 inches in 1 day. But that growth is only possible because of the strong, fully developed root system underground. The roots stabilize and anchor the plant in place. Nurturing bamboo requires patience and time, but because of that, bamboo is an incredibly rewarding plant to grow. Mr. Walma now works in athletics at Hope College. Here's a picture of his office. Every day, Mr. Walma reminds himself of his vocation and of the individuals who are reaped from it. I've known the positive impact of an educator as early as elementary school, but the bamboo analogy became especially apparent to me during high school. My teacher's commitment to providing quality education often extended well beyond my time spent in the classroom. They invested their personal time and energy to ensure I had a community of support. My educators took time to have meaningful conversations with me. They showed up to my tennis matches and choir performances. They had patience with my individual growth and continued to challenge my character. My high school educators' impact delves deep beyond the surface level. I've actually stayed in touch with many of them as they've become dear friends. Their intentional nurturing has allowed me to develop my own root system, which anchors me in place to this day. Most significantly, though, one of my educators became a part of my testimony. My senior year of high school was the most challenging year of my life. I experienced a series of traumatic events that altered how I viewed myself and the world around me. Success in academics, athletics, and extracurriculars became an impossible task amongst the battles I faced with depression and anxiety. My physical strength deteriorated with my mental strength, and at my worst, I lost 11 pounds in 8 days. Suicidal thoughts became ever present in my mind, and thoughts soon turned into plans. But I'm here today, speaking in front of all of you, because of my persistent and caring educators. I found the courage to open up to one of my educators, Mrs. Bullheis, about my struggles. Because she had taken time to invest in me early in my high school career, I trusted my reality with her. She was the first person to whom I admitted I wanted to take my own life. She immediately took action. She set me up with a licensed therapist and accommodated a productive school schedule that was suitable for my healing journey. Mrs. Bullheis continued to check in and provide the support I desperately needed. She patiently stood by my side for the entirety of the year. Eventually, like growing bamboo, Mrs. Bullheis saw the fruit of her labor. Her contributions to my academic success allowed me to graduate as an AP scholar and salutatorian. On top of that, I regained my physical strength and I was able to compete in the tennis state finals at the end of the year. I went on to continue my academics and athletics at Hope College. I now see value, hope, and a future in my own life, just as Mrs. Bullheis did. I'm increasingly grateful for educators. They spend so much time with students, and because of that, they have the ability to make great impacts. I'm especially grateful for Mr. Andrews and Mrs. Bullheis, who played a significant role in my journey. Just like a well-cared-for bamboo seed, my educator's caring presence will allow me to continue growing exponentially. I'm sure most of us here could think of an educator who's impacted them for good. And if you're lucky like me, you can name quite a few. While it's undeniable that our educators have a significant role in our upbringing, the challenges they face have reached a critical juncture. In contrast to the enduring positive impacts of educators, recent trends show that the teaching profession is facing numerous challenges. According to the Pew Research Center, the number of students receiving degrees in education decreased by 50% within the last 5 decades. Concerns about salary and working conditions continue to turn prospective educators away. Obvious fears regarding school shootings demoralizes educators. Additionally, the current state of our political and cultural world, amidst the culture wars, forces educators into the spotlight. Recent statistics found that there is an overall lack of trust and respect for what teachers bring into the classroom. A national survey from the Center of Applied Research in Education from the University of Southern California found that 6 out of 10 American parents think they should be able to opt children out of school lessons that include content they find disagreeable. On top of that, teaching in the post-COVID-19 classroom presents its own set of challenges. Educators must cater to students with various needs, which have only diversified after the pandemic. I have seen students face various pandemic-related academic, behavioral, and emotional setbacks. I can only imagine how these new challenges have made education an increasingly demanding job. Many of our educators are pushed to the limit. The National Education Association found that 55% of our educators want to leave the classroom altogether. Many have. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more than 300,000 public school teachers and staff have left the classroom between February of 2020 and May of 2022. Schools are left with vacancies as the pipeline of teachers has dried up. As a result, 3/4 of educators have had to take up additional work due to staff shortages. And still, they aren't compensated sufficiently for their work. We have a crisis on our hands, and the stakes are high. We can't afford to lose the very people who support and invest in our youth every day. And right now, especially, our youth need that support. The CDC reported that within a decade, adolescent depression and suicide rates both increased by 60%. An analysis from millions of U.S. hospitals found that pediatric self-harm hospitalizations increased by 163%. These statistics are gut-wrenching. But take a look at my testimony and see that schools have become a place for students to receive the help they need. Teachers are often the first adults to notice signs that point to mental health crises in students. They are in critical positions to intervene. Our future depends upon the presence of our educators. Without careful nurturing, bamboo cannot grow. In order to aid this pressing issue, we must act today. You don't need to be a superhero to make a difference. You can start by simply thanking your educators. Reach out to a teacher who challenged you, encouraged you, or guided you. Donate supplies like tissues, pencils, and hand sanitizers to classrooms. The cost of those items majorly come out of teachers' pockets. Reach out to your school board and get involved. Suggest to establish district policies that advocate for teachers and their expertise in the classroom. Continue to inform yourself and others in your community about the increasing difficulties in the education field. We owe a debt of gratitude to our educators, and I encourage you to do your part to show your appreciation. Educators, I want to remind you that you are nurturing bamboo. Although you may not see the fruit of your labor for years, your work matters. Because of what you do every day, today's youth will grow into the leaders, creators, and peacemakers we need both now and in the future. So let's invest in education as our educators have invested in us. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. Our next speaker is a senior from Bentonville, Arkansas, studying English for secondary education. Her talk is titled The Great Power and Responsibility of Comics in Culture. Please welcome Hannah Lever.
What is real reading? This is a question that haunted me as a student, and I still encounter as a future English teacher. How do we know that students are being challenged appropriately? How do we know that what they're reading will improve their test scores? I have some better questions. How do we know that students will still be passionate about reading and storytelling outside of the classroom? Are we cultivating a culture of literacy? Do human beings exist to serve language, processing letters to words to formulate grammatically correct sentences the same way a computer processes numbers? Or is language our tool for self-expression? I am tired of defining reading as a measure of misery. Students and educators alike are missing the forest for the trees when it comes to reading, missing the vast scope of storytelling and human expression when we read for a test score and a grade. I've devoted much of my research in my education classes to figuring out how to include graphic novels in every area of the curriculum, not just for struggling readers, but for students who need to be challenged. Often I find myself defending the medium to parents and teachers, and even myself, with works such as Mouse, Fun Home, and Persepolis. These are all wonderful works that I highly recommend, but they're all nonfiction centered around the most devastating situations a person can experience. And is suffering the only emotion that real reading should evoke? Is it what motivates us to immerse ourselves in literature? I use these works and others like them to prove that the medium is not just silly superhero comic books. But I do not believe that superheroes and comic books are silly. In fact, I believe they possess great depth. Why should I have to hide my enthusiasm for this medium when I think that enthusiasm for storytelling is exactly what education and our culture is missing? The only difference between a comic book and a graphic novel is that a comic is published serially, the same way that a TV show airs a new episode every week. Except for comics are never ending, they are only told fresh by new hands throughout the years. A comic book storyline can be connected into a graphic novel and garner some prestige from that. But ultimately, graphic novels are inspired by comic books, and the language and history of comics is rich and detailed and worthy of study. When we dismiss an entire medium as fake reading, we give ourselves permission to accept their messaging uncritically. Visual sequential story, when I speak of comic books, we often think of superheroes. And that's a genre, and it's not the only genre that the medium has to offer, but it is the origin story. So let's talk about superheroes, because they have been dominating pop culture for decades, and for too long, we have allowed ourselves to think of them as simply neutral. Visual sequential storytelling has existed for as long as humanity has had writing. The practice arguably goes back to ancient Egypt, but it is the political cartoons of the American progressive era that gives birth to the comic book as we know it. Today, we study these newspaper cartoons as historical documents, telling us just as much about the time period as the writing in the newspaper itself. And that was true at the time as well. Some of the greatest stories of the era were reported on using cartoons, creating lasting social and political change. But at the time, they were spoken of the same way our parents talk about iPhones. They're corrupting the youth. There's nothing of substance. They're rotting your brain. This backlash separated the cartoons and comic strips from newspaper, giving birth to a new medium, the comic book. This new art form was created and pioneered and perfected by Jewish American immigrants, all out of a passion for the stories that they could tell, but for many, because they were denied opportunities in traditional journalism. This industry was deeply involved in current events and created a new American identity, and yet it was less than glamorous, did not pay well, and would not get your name in the history books. You likely don't know the names Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, but you do know the name Superman. The character debuted in 1939. For a little historical context, Hitler was invading Poland, Jewish people and other persecuted groups were fleeing Europe, and America was accepting very few refugees. Schuster and Siegel took inspiration from Friedrich Nietzsche's theory of the Übermensch, the idea that the pinnacle of humanity could be achieved through good breeding. The idea was in the zeitgeist at the time because it was the foundation of Nazi eugenics pseudoscience. But Schuster and Siegel took this idea and they combined it with their Jewish heritage, pulling inspiration from Moses to translate the Übermensch to Superman. This pinnacle was not achieved through eugenics, but rather his power comes from the fact that he is an outsider, an immigrant, and a foreigner. The Superman that they presented to the public was not the ideal of humanity because of removal, but because of inclusion, and his belief that all human life was worthy of being protected. The idea of the Übermensch is twisted once again in 1941 by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon with the invention of Captain America. He's blonde, he's blue-eyed, and he's punching Hitler in the face. This may seem apolitical now, but at the time it was a deeply radical statement, as the United States had not yet declared war on Germany, and many Americans were in support of Nazi ideals. Simon and Kirby's office would receive several threats of violence while they worked on the Captain America comic. But yet, to see the ideal man that Hitler and his followers obsessed over, and he wants nothing to do with the fascism that idolized him, was a powerful statement, made even more powerful by who was telling it. Simon and Kirby pulled from Jewish culture, such as myths of the Golem, and combined him with American iconography to beg their government to get involved in the war and protect their people from a genocide. Comics became a voice for the voiceless, a way to call on those with power to protect those who had none. The comics of this time period were deeply engaged in current events and formed a new American identity. And yet, they were still dismissed as childish and corrupting because of who was writing them. After World War II, the comic book industry expands. New companies, new creators, and new characters are invented. And the Comic Code of Authority is established to show parents that comic books are wholesome, all-American fun. But the comics' connection to current events is not severed. In fact, this aspect of them only grows. Spider-Man would attend anti-war protests in the 60s and 70s. Superheroes and sidekicks alike were shown grappling with America's drug crisis. Marvel's X-Men used the metaphor of mutants to explore ideas of race and intersectionality. And Captain America and Superman were no longer across the ocean fighting Nazis, but instead at home fighting the Klan. These stories are deeply engaged in the question of justice. What is it? Who gets to decide what it is? And how is it enacted? This medium has created a whole new way of telling stories, a whole new literacy. I can point you to countless comics that are engaged in the socio-political events of their time, and our time too, as this legacy is continued today. But I encourage you to seek them out on your own. Get curious and try something new, and approach it the same way you would a novel or a piece of art in a museum, as something an artist poured themselves into because they believed they had a story worthy of being heard. I don't want to give you the wrong idea here. Superheroes in comic books are not inherently perfect because of their origin in immigration and the progressive era. For every forward-thinking, politically engaged comic, there is another that barely rocks the boat and stands with those who already hold the power. But how can you know the difference if you've already dismissed the entire medium as frivolous, as fake reading? Our culture is filled with superheroes. I'm willing to bet that everyone in this room has seen a movie based off of a comic book. But did you really think about that movie? Or did you lose yourself in the action and spectacle? The superheroes of the big blockbuster screen are just as politically engaged, asking questions of truth and justice and the new American way. How often do you question what they're saying? When we dismiss an entire genre, an entire medium as anti-intellectual, as nothing more than popcorn movies and filler entertainment, as nothing more than children's picture books, we give ourselves permission to accept their messaging uncritically, to allow them to hold space within ourselves without examination. When we say a piece of art has no value, we cannot see the values it is displaying, and we accept them as neutral. Real reading doesn't just take place in a traditional novel and in the classroom. It is engaged every second of every day because literacy extends beyond letters. It is every form of communication. I hope I have convinced you to give a second chance to comic books and graphic novels. The superhero genre is only a small piece of what the medium has to offer. There's truly something for everyone. But most importantly, I encourage you to re-examine and think critically about every piece of art and fiction that you deemed unworthy of the title of real. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Our next speaker is a sophomore from Clare, Michigan, studying neuroscience. This talk will cover eating disorders and body image, and if you're sensitive to these topics, again, please feel free to step out. Her title is The Power of Addition, Gating Life Over Losing Weight. Please join me in welcoming Allie Boyd.
I've often heard the question proposed, do you live to eat or eat to live? I'm highly skeptical of anyone who responds with the latter. In fact, I choose not to believe you at all. I mean, you're telling me that you don't love food? Because, after all, food is so much more than just fuel. Food is a central component of culture and connection. Food is something that we take pride in cultivating and sharing with those around us. It's a part of our memories and nostalgia. Have you ever considered the fact that most of our holidays are centered around sharing a meal with our families? We have the Thanksgiving turkey, Christmas ham, and even birthday cake. Food is a part of celebrating special occasions with people we love. However, I will admit that that's a romanticized perspective of how the holidays can really go. Instead of enjoying the good food that's been prepared for us, people tend to make negative comments about your plate or their own. I've compiled a list of common remarks. I'm eating so bad today. Or, I ate nothing today to save for this meal. Or, I'm gonna have to make up for this after the new year. It can be difficult sitting at the table with your family, feeling like everyone's trying to defend the reason that they get to eat Thanksgiving dinner. Over time, I've realized no one has to earn food. It's meant to be enjoyable, satisfying, and most importantly, guilt-free. However, we're all fighting the cultural construct that food is a tool we use to change our bodies. If we eat the right things, then we're allowed to love ourselves. But if we don't, we're supposed to feel guilty about it. This message has been perpetuated for years. In the 1930s, people were advised to smoke cigarettes to lose weight. In the 50s, there were electric spot reducers that used massage to target body fat. In the 70s, you could buy trim jeans, which were inflatable pants that would squeeze the fat off your waist. Perhaps we didn't know enough then. But if that were the case, we should be better now, right? I'll let you judge that one for yourself. If we're better, then why do we still have magazines that look just like this? Picture it. There's a skinny woman on the cover in a bikini, and she's smiling really big because she lost 20 pounds, and she's going to show you how to do it too in 10 days. Or they find the worst possible photo of a celebrity who's gained weight and say, she's lost herself. This is what happens when you're stuck in the pursuit of thinness. At the end of the day, our culture is fixated on making you the smallest version of yourself, no matter the cost. But we often lose so much in the desire to lose weight. And I say we because I've experienced this firsthand. When I was 14 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia. Anorexia is an eating disorder characterized by distorted body image and intense fear of being overweight. I used to schedule my entire day around food and exercise because my sole priority was to be small. And I'm not saying that everyone has that extreme kind of trouble with food. However, in a culture like ours, I'd find it hard to believe that you never have trouble with food, fitness, or your body. Maybe it looks like guilt when indulging in dessert, feeling like you have to get bikini body ready in the summertime, or fearing the forbidden freshman 15. Regardless, there's a better alternative out there. I'd like to propose a new approach to well-being, the principle of addition. What is the principle of addition, you may ask? Well, the basic gist of the concept is this: bring value to your diet, exercise routine, and lifestyle by adding things in, not by just taking them out. It's a gentler approach to your health that doesn't require restriction or incite fear around food. And speaking of health, let's talk about the science of being healthy. In terms of nutrition, guidelines are frequently changing, leaving people with mixed messages about what to eat. And that's just considering research, let alone everything we see on social media. There's an influencer out there promoting every diet you can think of. And every one of the food groups that you love has been targeted by at least one diet. There's keto, vegetarianism, veganism, sugar-free, fat-free, and even some people who only eat fruit. And every one of the people who promotes these diets will tell you it's the right one for you, only because they think it's the right one for them. And maybe it is, but maybe it's not. It's the same with exercise. Everyone has a different opinion about what kinds of workouts you should be doing. Strength training, cardio, HIIT, Pilates, the list goes on. At this point, no one is quite sure what workouts to be doing or how much. But why does this all matter? Well, interestingly enough, people tend to directly equate health to just being skinny. Think about it for a second. When a diet or exercise plan is being advertised to you online, what's the main benefit being promoted? Often, it's their ability to help you lose weight. But being healthy is multifaceted, which means that food and exercise can do so much more for you than just help you lose weight. According to researchers Bonjari, Bonani, Stillman, and colleagues, food is a necessary source of energy for our brains. The food we eat impacts our mood, concentration, and overall cognitive function. Exercise has the ability to improve quality of sleep, reduce depression, and can even prevent neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. How cool is that? When we understand that food and exercise have more than one benefit to offer, we judge them with less scrutiny. After all, it doesn't make much sense to directly compare two types of diets against each other, nor two types of exercise, because they serve different purposes in different contexts. Let me give you an example. My classmate eats a gluten-free diet because she has an autoimmune disorder. Gluten doesn't serve her body, but that doesn't automatically mean it's bad for mine. My friend likes to swim for cardio, and I prefer to run. Who's to say which one's right and which one's wrong? Long story short, there is no right answer, and that's a good thing. So let's think back to the addition principle I mentioned earlier. Instead of starting crash diets or committing to crazy exercise routines, what if we took a gentler approach to food and fitness? In terms of nutrition, what if there were no bad foods and we sought to make all of them fit? For example, let's say you're really craving a pizza. Most diets don't make room for food like pizza ever, and that mindset makes us feel guilty. How can we make the pizza fit? Well, let's have the pizza, but let's add vegetables on the side so we get nutrients, vitamins, and fiber. Let's have the pizza, but let's add a protein so that the meal is satiating and keeps you fuller for longer. If you've ever struggled with disordered or restrictive eating, this is a safer approach that doesn't incite fear around food. Instead, it teaches you how to add value to your plate rather than just taking things away. And it works similarly with exercise. Instead of hyperfixating on one type of workout all the time, it's better to strike a balance that incorporates all types of movement. Try biking, swimming, dancing, walking your dog, or even playing pickleball. But most importantly, if you find there's a workout you don't like, don't do it. I personally have a vendetta against Bulgarian split squats. I don't do them anymore because I feel like this when I do them. And while I know I could benefit from doing Bulgarian split squats, I found other ways to strengthen my body that bring me more joy. You're allowed to find what works for you. After all, the movement you enjoy is the movement you're motivated by, and that's the kind you actually maintain. It's moving your body because you love it, not because you hate it. However, I would like to address that the addition principle is not meant to be one size fits all. The whole point is that it's nuanced, not black and white. The addition principle is a perspective a perspective that's meant to soften the lens with which you view yourself and your body. This talk is not designed to demonize dieting or weight loss. Your health is important. I just want you to consider why you make these choices. Are you doing it because you hate the aesthetics of your body? Or because you're grateful that you get to have one at all? The main goal of the addition principle is to remind you that you owe yourself grace. You deserve grace when you emotionally eat a pint of ice cream because your chemistry exam did not go well. Or when you skip your workouts for a week because life got in the way. Truly, none of these things need forgiveness. Sometimes, hear me out, you have to nourish your spirit before your body. We like to define things as good and bad because that's just what makes sense in our heads. But this is an oversimplification that underestimates the reality of our complex world. You're not bad for choosing a fulfilling experience over a smaller body. You're just human. And that fulfilling experience should involve more than just food and fitness. Above all, the addition principle is meant to be applied to your life. When I was facing the worst of my eating disorder, I lost sight of everything that mattered. I don't talk about this period of my life very often with anyone because there were so many bad memories and very few good ones. However, as outsiders looking in, I'm not sure whether you would have thought so. Let's look back at some old memories. When I was 14, my cousin was born. Yet the first time I held him, I was thinking about whether I should try intermittent fasting. It was my first year of high school, and I went to my first homecoming dance that I had dreamed about. But I hated the sight of myself in this dress. I took my first trip to California, and I even had the opportunity to go to Disneyland. But I wasted most of the trip counting calories. My grades were good. My friends were kind. And I should look back on these days fondly. But I don't. Instead, I remember how I had to wear a winter coat inside every day because my body could not generate its own heat. That I felt like I was going to pass out every time I just stood up. That I couldn't sleep ever. And even if I did, I had nightmares where people offered me food that I couldn't take. That year of my life is permanently scarred by the all-consuming fear of taking up space. Losing weight didn't grant me a better life like I once thought it would. I walked through life without living it, and I let every beautiful thing pass me by. So I implore you to ask yourself the question, what kind of life would you be proud of? When you're 70 years old, what are the stories that you want to remember? I'd hate to look back and think that I spent 90% of my life trying to weigh 10% less. I want a life that's worth remembering. Well, what does that look like? Let me show you. It looks like the peace of being your true self. It looks like the joy of authentic friendships. But most importantly, it looks like love. You want to know where I found all of these things? In a body that weighs 30 pounds heavier than the one I originally wanted. And it's all worth it, because now I get to wear fun clothes, bright, colorful, regardless of whether they make me look skinny. I run for fun and lift to feel strong, not to feel small. I gladly eat pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving these days, although I prefer pecan. Most importantly, I take opportunities as they come to me, like giving my own TED Talk, because I know I deserve to take up space. And so do you. That's the true power of the addition principle. Instead of thinking about all of the parts of ourselves that should become less, we think about every part that should become more. It's embracing the best parts of who you are, whether that be your kindness, creativity, your humor, and enhancing them. After all, your body is the least interesting thing about you. With the power of addition, I hope that you all may seek to gain life rather than just lose weight. Because the best version of you isn't the smallest one. Thank you.
Thank you, Allie. Our last speaker of the night is a junior from Holland, Michigan, studying electrical engineering. His talk is titled Drawing Attention to the Attention Deficient Undergrad. Please join me in welcoming Eric Alsgaard.
My name is Eric Alsgaard, and I've never been very good at sitting still. Seated on the pool stairs with all the other kids at swim lessons, 4-year-old Eric is starry-eyed and restless. Parents and their blocky digital cameras flank us on all sides. You can feel the excitement and smell the chlorine in both the water and the air. Our teacher, Miss Amanda, is mid-instruction, but my mind is elsewhere. I think a thought so profound that I just can't hold it in. With zero hesitation nor awareness of my action, I bolt up with raised hand and proudly announce, "Everyone, stop talking! I have something to say!" My profound announcement, excitement. Miss Amanda has this look on her face. It's shock. Nobody really knows how to react. My mother doesn't remember my announcement. More than 16 years have passed since I demonstrated obvious signs of dysfunctional impulse control. I'd be 20 before anyone labeled those as ADHD. More than 4 full semesters of college would pass before discovering that I am one of the millions of students enrolled in higher education with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You see, no less than 5.6% of all students in college have a disorder that impacts everything from their academics to their social lives. And our problem is simple. The learning model of college structurally disadvantages students with ADHD. If you haven't already been introduced to one of the most well-researched disorders in medical history, meet attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Symptoms can be primarily categorized by 3 dominant characteristics: hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention. Adults with hyperactive ADHD tendencies are restless, with gesturing hands and tapping feet, in minds that think even faster than they talk or move. Impulsivity presents itself as trouble with blurting, difficulty waiting for turns in conversation, as well as many behaviors that include unconscious reactions to strong emotions. Finally, inattentiveness lives in the daydreamers. Your friends that can't quite seem to pay attention to detail, but can be distracted by the smallest of them. If you have ADHD, you'll present some combination of hyperactive impulsive or inattentive behaviors, and even all 3 combined. To understand what makes learning so difficult for students with ADHD, we need to discuss its role as a neurodevelopmental disorder. Structures within our brains mature and develop at a slower rate. But these underdeveloped areas control some of the most important functions of everyday life. For this talk, we're primarily interested in attentional regulation, emotional regulation, and executive functions, but please keep in mind that these are only a fraction of the ways we're behaviorally affected. I want to pause for a second. I want you all to think of a task that you really didn't want to do. What made that task so hard to complete? Did you struggle to start it? And if so, were there so many steps involved that you knew you'd forget one along the way? If so, your executive functions might be to blame. These are your 8 neurological abilities associated with achieving goals and completing tasks. They consist of self-awareness and emotional regulation, inhibition and self-motivation, verbal and nonverbal working memory, and finally, you may have guessed, planning and problem solving. It's believed that these functions are connected to the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is almost always weaker and underdeveloped in the ADHD brain. As a result, fundamental life skills become inconsistent and unreliable. We call this executive dysfunction. Revisiting that insurmountable task from earlier, executive dysfunction can make any task feel just as impossible. If your task is academic, asking for accommodations may prove useful, but doing so requires voluntarily disclosing your disorder. And unfortunately for many of us, no accommodations exist for putting away your laundry after you folded it for some reason. In the collegiate environment, symptoms can be completely unidentifiable. Let me tell you the story of 3 students. One, a hard worker and a people pleaser who needed some extra time to process what she learned in class. The second, who slept through a midterm. And the third, who excelled in his subject knowledge, yet always scored lower than average on exams. The common thread between these 3 students, you may have guessed, is that they all have ADHD. But they all didn't know it. And they all dropped out because of their symptoms. Dr. Russell Barkley's and Dr. Lily Heckman's work paints a larger picture of this issue. Only 21% of young adults with ADHD will even pursue a college education. If their symptoms persist, 8% of them will complete it. 1 in 13. That 8% will perform worse academically. They'll be more likely to fail their classes, and they might not ever know why. The truth is, we have a system on our hands that is becoming almost completely inaccessible to a fraction of the world's population, all because it fails to accommodate the way their brains work. Because the very foundations of collegiate learning are a challenge. Lectures require split focus between listening and writing notes for your later understanding. Most academic performance indicators, such as grades, suggest you're doing well in classes if you can recite the correct information on time, not whether or not you're directly understanding it. And I'd argue that strict recitation is directly counterintuitive to how students with ADHD learn best, through exploration. Marie Clapirozzi phrases it perfectly. Students with ADHD are believed to experience autonomy whenever they perceive that they are empowered to discover, take the lead, and develop alternatives for their specific problems. We need exploration because our brains need constant stimulation. When classes aren't interesting, our brains naturally wander towards anything else that could be, and we call this an attention deficit. Structural limitations are also highly in place for students with ADHD. The means of academic access were not designed for these students. Semester-long projects were not designed for students with unreliable task initiation skills. High-stress exam environments don't exactly lend themselves to the emotionally dysregulated. Lectures were not designed to capture deficient attention. And what's the alternative? None of these give us time or space to learn or grow academically because they limit our learning to a one-size-fits-all model. But because each student has unique reasons for pursuing a college education, each student has equally unique ways of accessing the information required to do so. You'll learn different in the classes that you're fighting to pass versus the ones that you love. Students with deficient memory and students with photographic memory can learn the same thing in different ways. But if these ways aren't available, we cannot expect students to learn or engage academically. Both the very reasons why students and educators are in college to begin with. Structural limitations and insufficient methods of access naturally create an academic disadvantage. Attention-deficient brains naturally look to jobs and extracurriculars to learn the same material in more interesting ways. Doing so pulls them further from their studies and widens the academic disparity. I found purpose in my work with our student Congress, but several weeks last semester I spent more time with Congress than I did my homework. I spend my time and attention on the ways that best empower my learning, and it hurts my grade point average. The fundamental ways that I am empowered to learn are simultaneously bad for my academics. Could I propose the notion then that the students learning the most might not be the ones with 4.0 GPAs? We have long confused perfect grades with perfect learning, and doing so discourages the innate framework of the ADHD undergraduate. So it is clear to me that our structure cannot stay like this. Change starts with an acknowledgement that it is flawed and action from the key stakeholders involved to enact it. First, educators. We need to provide students with the necessary means of academic engagement and exploration. Give them grace when it happens outside of the classroom. I firmly believe that it is possible to reimagine the structure of higher education while still maintaining its academic rigor. Because having the option to write papers or build models instead of taking exams does not lower the difficulty of a class, but does lower the barrier for entry into it. This is an example of universal design for learning, founded to ensure all students have appropriate representation, methods of engagement, and expression within a given academic context. But we can't stop there. Getting to know each student's unique needs is also paramount to cultivating an accessible classroom environment. Last semester, I really struggled with assignment deadlines because of my task initiation. I had 5 classes, each with a week's worth of homework due on Friday night, and it always overwhelmed me. Having a professor that understood this and didn't penalize me if his assignments came in a day late was vital to my understanding and success in his course. I could both engage with and explore the material at my own pace. And I did so without ever having to disclose my neurodivergence. Remember that ADHD affects everyone on a case-by-case basis, and each person's unique needs and feelings towards it will differ. Finally, gracias, profe, for teaching me that nobody is entitled to anybody's disclosure. Second, to students and staff alike, we need to work tirelessly to destigmatize disorders. ADHD may be classified as a disorder because of the ways it impacts our day-to-day functions, but that does not make it something to be ashamed of. Our brains are simply wired differently. Removing the negative connotation behind neurodivergence creates understanding, and let that understanding be this: we don't want grandeur. We want to graduate. I hope that we can, together, foster an accessible environment in which all students feel adequate for voicing their unique needs. Finally, to my fellow students with ADHD, listen closely. You are incredible. You are so unimaginably capable, and you are enough. No grade point average or test score should tell you otherwise. I wanted this talk to draw light to the everyday experiences of the neurodivergent student by acknowledging the structures that disadvantage us. My stories alone do not tell the full story. You have a brain worth celebrating. Tirelessly and bravely advocate for what you need. Give yourself grace when your brain falls short of unfair expectations. Don't forget to put your wallet somewhere you'll remember it. Own your brain and who you are. Only you can tell the full story. To each and every one of you, thank you for being my reason why. Because the truth is, we're all in this together. An endless journey, reshaping the structure and the culture surrounding the highest levels of learning. I know that we can reimagine our standards to embrace the beauty of ADHD. So I leave you all with one final choice. Should we continue upholding standards that discourage the motivational and foundational framework of the neurodivergent undergraduate? Or can we draw attention to the attention-deficient undergraduate and make college learning accessible for everyone? Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. As our event comes to an end, I urge you to think about the journeys in your own lives that seemingly never end. I hope these speakers have contributed meaningful stories and experiences to each of your own lives. And I want to take this time to say some important thank yous. Thank you to my wonderful and hardworking executive team, Amadou, Avas, Jane, our curators, Marissa, our tech lead, Chloe, our marketing lead, Brooke, our curator liaison. Your passion for this organization has shown throughout the year, and I'm so proud to have been given the opportunity to lead this team. And thank you to our advisor, Andrew, wherever you are up there. You are so helpful and just a pleasure to work with. Thank you to our amazing volunteers for contributing your time to such a special event and making it all happen. Without you, there truly would be no event. Thank you to Hope College events and conferences, video services, and student life for being incredibly supportive and working with us to make everything happen. And thank you to all of you for attending and supporting TEDx Hope College. Now, let me welcome all of our speakers back on stage for one last round of applause. This concludes TEDx Hope College 2024. Thank you for all for coming, and we'll see you again next year.